As you know, my name is Keith Bybee, and with Dean Arterian, I co-organize the 1L Convocation lecture series. Today we have our fourth lecture in this five-lecture series for this year. The title of the lecture is Law, Lawyering, and Citizenship, Developing Excellent Lawyers and Even Better Citizens. Our speaker is Pauline Schneider, who is partner and head of the public finance group in the Washington, D.C. office of Orrick, Herrington, and Sutcliffe. Ms. Schneider has been in private practice since 1985. Before joining Orrick, she was a partner at Hunt & Williams. Prior to that, she spent 4 years in the Carter White House in the Office of Intergovernmental Affairs and Secretary to the Cabinet, and 4 years in the District of Columbia government, where she was director of the Office of Intergovernmental Relations. She earned her BA at Glassboro State College and her MS in Urban Studies at Howard University and her JD at Yale Law School. Her practice is quite diverse. It focuses on transactional matters, including the representation of state and local governments and government instrumentalities, not-for-profit borrowers and other eligible beneficiaries, underwriters, investment bankers, and credit enhancement providers on general obligation and revenue bond financing for, and this is a long list, airports, mass transit, water and sewers, housing, hospitals, educational facilities, convention centers, sports arenas, and general governmental projects. If you go into virtually any city in the United States and open your eyes, you will see some of the good work that Ms. Schneider has done. She's very active in the legal profession, and she performs a good deal of public service. We are delighted to have her with us today. Before I turn over the podium to Ms. Schneider, let me just remind you of the protocol here. First, I ask that you turn off all phones and mobile devices so they don't beep or ring during the lecture. After Ms. Schneider's remarks, which will run for about 30 minutes, we'll have an opportunity for question and answer. If you have a question, just please raise your hand, and we'll come to you with a wireless mic so your question can be heard by everybody in the hall. We will have you underway by 12:50 so you can get to your classes on time. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Pauline Schneider.
Good afternoon, and thanks for the introduction, Keith, and thanks for the warm welcome. It's better than the weather outside. It's kind of nice to be back in Syracuse. One of the things that Keith didn't mention is that I did graduate work here a few years ago. But I haven't been back in this city since I left in June of 1966, headed back home to get married and to start a new adventure along this journey called life. Much has happened in the intervening nearly 5 decades since I was here. And when I looked around a bit last night through the snowflakes, it was clear that much has happened here at Syracuse as well. Much has changed. So let me digress for a moment about memories of my days in Syracuse, which I suspect some of you might find amusing or strange or perhaps a little pathetic. Let's begin with the fact that I grew up in a small town in South Jersey, and I commuted to Glassboro State College, which was about 22 miles away. And Glassboro is now known as Rowan University. Some of you may have heard of it. But at the time I was there, it was a small state school focused primarily on teacher education. We had about 3,200 students, and about 99% of the students were residents of the state of New Jersey. And probably at least 60% of them commuted to school. But despite growing up in South Jersey, for some reason I developed this wanderlust. And I had a relative who lived in Washington, D.C., and she sent me an article out of the newspaper which said that the Ford Foundation had developed a program designed to get more minorities into U.S. Foreign Service. I immediately applied, and I was accepted into the program and received a scholarship for my senior year at college and for fellowship work here at Syracuse. I studied international relations at the Maxwell School. But about midway through my year here, I also got engaged, and I got kicked out of the program. And at that time, the government was not taking married women into the Foreign Service. That later changed when, not surprisingly, there was a class action that was brought by women, and the State Department lost. But by that time, I had moved on to Plan B. Syracuse was a brave new world for me compared to Glassboro. The campus was huge, and the student body was enormous. There were all of these graduate and undergraduate programs. You had such well-known and respected professors. Your athletic teams were nationally ranked, and there was always something going on here. Not only did I meet students from across the nation, but also from around the world. I learned to speak Hindi and focused on my studies on the subcontinent, and made some really good friends here, including a woman who was my housemate and who is now the godmother of my 2 children. It was during the time that I was here that there was the famous Northeast blackout, during which electrical power was lost to more than 30 million people in the Northeast, from Canada through all of New England, through New York, parts of Pennsylvania, and New Jersey. That's probably a historical fact for most of you. You probably never heard of it before. On that evening, my housemates and I huddled at our apartment windows as we watched the campus slowly go dark. It wasn't all at once. There was a fade, and it got dimmer, and then everything turned black. We were terrified and fascinated at the same time because we didn't know what was going on or why. We initially did not know that there were 30 million people in 8 states who were in the similar situation. And without electricity, our radios and televisions did not work. And we didn't have cell phones or Blackberries or similar communications devices which could operate without electricity. But the thing that I liked least about Syracuse was its long, cold, and stormy winters, kind of like today, or yesterday when I came in, which seemed to begin in October and not end until May. I vividly recall that during the year that I was here, between Thanksgiving, the Thanksgiving break and the Christmas break, it snowed, rained, or it was overcast, cloudy, and cold every single day. While it seems unlikely, I do not recall seeing the sun one day during that dismal stretch. The second semester continued that trend. It wasn't until mid-April that things started to look up, with a few flowers and birdies making an appearance, although we kept our coats on well into May. At least that's my memory. And it's probably the reason I've never been back until today. But I digress. Let's go to the business at hand. I was asked almost a year ago about coming up and speaking to the 1L Convocation. And last February, when I agreed to do this, I thought, well, it won't be spring yet, but maybe we'll at least get a sunny day. And I thought that would give me plenty of time to think about what I really wanted to talk about today. I also thought that the conversation I wanted to have might make more sense in the second semester, because you will have been a little further along and you might have a little better sense of things and have more questions you would like to ask. I also confess, however, that procrastination skills that I learned in college are still with me, and I found myself editing this talk as recently as this morning. But today I want to spend some time trying to make the case that what the United States needs today, at this point in its history, are not simply more lawyers, but more excellent lawyers. And even more than excellent lawyers, we need better citizens. Let me try to explain what I mean, and give you a context for reflecting on your achievements when you get to be my age and you look back at your life's journey and try to figure out whether you like what you're seeing or not. Most of you probably know that many people in the United States who need lawyers can't afford them, and often the lawyers they can afford may not have the excellent skills that are optimal. As a result, those who can't afford lawyers are often unable to have their issues adjudicated, and those who are represented by lawyers who are viewed as less than optimal leave folks dissatisfied with the outcomes of their representation and with a negative view of lawyers and the legal profession. The United States has more lawyers per capita than any country in the world, yet many of our citizens are underrepresented or unrepresented because skilled lawyers are not accessible or not affordable to too many citizens who need those services. Now that you're enrolled here at the law school, you've taken an important step to becoming an excellent lawyer. Obviously, you would not have been admitted here if you did not have a strong undergraduate record from a reputable college or university. Further, I am confident that the faculty and administration at this great law school will do their part to assist you in this effort. You are being taught by an extraordinary faculty, distinguished by their academic credentials, publications, and teaching skills, who have dedicated many years of their lives to teaching the subjects you need to learn and others that you or they might find interesting, to stimulate your intellectual curiosity and nourish your legal knowledge. There are a wide variety of courses offered, clinical programs you can engage in, and other institutes, centers, and special programs, some offered jointly with other schools in the university that you can take advantage of here. The administration, ably led by your dean and my dear friend, Hannah Artarian, is attuned to your needs and ready to provide guidance on virtually any subject imaginable, and some I am sure they hadn't imagined. Despite the recent economic pressures on both summer employment and full-time legal employment, graduates of this law school have fared reasonably well, and certainly better than graduates of many other law schools. In short, all the building blocks are in place to produce excellent results if you do your part. So, what is the part that you need to do to hold up your end of the bargain? First, it's your responsibility to attend classes and do it on time and arrive prepared to learn. Keep current on your assignments, master your materials assigned in the courses, but don't feel limited to the materials that you've been assigned. Consider exploring materials beyond those that are assigned to develop a deeper understanding of a subject, a concept, or legal theory. Take time to discuss issues with classmates and professors. If there's something you don't understand or you want to explore further, do it. Take the initiative. Be inquisitive without being obnoxious. Feed your intellectual curiosity, and don't be shy. Ours is not a profession that tends to reward shyness. Choose your elective courses thoughtfully. Digest the subject material carefully, and perform well on your exam or paper or whatever other measure is used in each of these courses. Law school is not a marathon, it's a sprint. And you need to remain focused and push hard for the full 3 years. Understanding that the opportunities that flow from this experience will be almost directly equivalent to your efforts. There are certain courses you are required to take, and there are others that you are encouraged to take because they might show up on the bar exam. I would encourage you to also take courses to satisfy your personal interest. I can assure you that there is virtually no course that you can take in this law school today about a subject if you, at some future point, represent a client who has an issue involving the same subject matter that you will feel fully prepared. That just won't happen. I also urge you to take clinics where you can engage in practical skills training, and to try to do legal work in the summer or part-time while you're here in law school, so that you can appreciate the practical application of the legal theories that you are learning in the classroom, and you can get a realistic sense of what the practice of law is all about. One of the things that we in private practice often complain about is the lack of practical skills of our summer associates or our first-year lawyers. At a time when clients are focused on cost, including spending less on outside counsel, law firms are less inclined to want to eat the cost of training new associates on how to draft a complaint or how to draft a loan agreement or other similar documents. Now, there is a great debate about whether that responsibility lies in the law school or whether it lies with those with whom you will practice in the future. But the economic reality today for most law firms is that they're objecting to that requirement that they now train lawyers in practical skills. Surely at this early stage of the legal education process, you probably are aware of the globalization of the practice of law. I can hardly imagine that it will be possible for you to practice in any area of law today without some point in your professional career becoming involved in an issue that implicates foreign laws. So you might want to consider taking part in one of the foreign summer programs or semester abroad that are offered by a number of U.S. accredited law schools. There are more than 200 such programs offered by ABA-approved law schools, many of which are excellent and offer an international or comparative perspective that could be enlightening and useful to you. In addition to taking courses because they interest you, you will benefit from some personal introspection. Spend some time thinking about who you are, what turns you on, what your strengths and weaknesses are, what you're passionate about, and how these things might factor into the kind of practice that will best suit you. Don't wait as long as I did to figure out this, and let me explain. Although I had worked for a number of years before I went to law school, I did not have a deep appreciation of what the practice of law was really like. I do not recall that while I was at Yale Law School that they offered a transactional course. So it never occurred to me to think about anything other than litigation. Fortunately, after I'd been in practice for a little more than a year, I had an opportunity to leave the firm and go into the White House and then into district government. While in district government, I was exposed to public finance and decided that was the practice I would pursue when I left government. I considered both sides of public finance, one being the investment banking side and the other being the legal side, but I chose to stick with the legal side for a number of reasons, and it's been a fabulous practice for me. I am one of the few lawyers I know who can say on a daily basis, I enjoy what I do every day. I discovered for the first time why I had not particularly enjoyed practice when I initially had entered the profession. It was because I hate the adversarial process, and I do not perform well in that environment. I hate to fight and never have been good at it. Even my ex-husband used to complain that I didn't fight fair because I refused to respond when he wanted to engage in an argument. As a transactional lawyer, each deal I do involves a number of folks who sit around the table, including lawyers, bankers, financial advisors, and borrowers. The lawyers all represent different parties to the transaction, but everybody around that table has a common goal: to get the deal done in the time frame we've laid out, and in most cases, unless we do get the deal done, we don't get paid. So, in my practice, there aren't winners and losers. We're all winners. And more importantly, public finance is grounded in the notion that only projects that have some public purpose can be financed on a tax-exempt basis. As a result, every transaction I do is in the public interest and is very tangible. I can look around many of the communities where I have done deals, and I can see the results of my effort in a convention center, a new airport terminal, a dormitory, hospital, a cancer center, a sports arena. The list goes on. I often tell students who are interviewing, who want to ask about the firm's pro bono program, I said, come to my practice, you'll do pro bono work every day. So think carefully about the kind of work you might enjoy. What is it that can get you out of bed in the morning early and keep you up late at night, and despite that, you look forward to going back and doing the same thing tomorrow and the next day and the next day? I know too many unhappy, bored, and bitter lawyers who made choices long ago that they regret, but were unable or unwilling for one reason or another to change course. As someone who has often changed directions and managed to land on her feet in spite of significant odds, I urge you not to assume any decision is irrevocable or that it's too late to change course once you've started. Now I want to come to my final point. Besides preparing yourselves to become excellent lawyers, you also need to assume certain duties and responsibilities of citizenship. Let me give you some definitional context to help you understand what I'm trying to get at. First, I do not use the term citizen to mean that an individual is legally a citizen of the United States, but rather I use it to connote members of a political community, the political community that is the United States, without regard to whether the person is a legal citizen. I use the term duties and responsibilities because I believe there are distinctions between those two concepts. The term duties is meant to cover those things that all citizens are legally bound to do, such as obey the laws, pay taxes, attend school to a certain age, register for the draft and serve in the military if you happen to be male, perform jury duty, similar things like that. I do not think any of us would quarrel with the notion that these are some of the basic duties of citizenship, without regard, I would note, to whether we are legally citizens of this country, even though some of these duties are only required of U.S. citizens. Then there are responsibilities that are more in the nature of a social contract this country has with its engaged citizens to take certain actions for the common good. The premise of this contract is that government cannot do all the things that its residents of this great nation require, and that we who are citizens of this political community and enjoy the rights of membership must voluntarily assume duties of membership as well. I was delighted when earlier this year, President Obama, in his State of the Union address, acknowledged this obligation when he said, and I quote, "We may do different jobs and wear different uniforms and hold different views than the person beside us. But as Americans, we all share the same proud title. We are citizens. It's a word that doesn't just describe our nationality or legal status. It describes the way we're made. It describes what we believe. It captures the enduring idea that this country only works when we accept certain obligations to one another and to future generations, that our rights are wrapped up in the rights of others, and that well into the 3rd century, as a nation, it remains the task of all of us as citizens of these United States to be the authors of the next great chapter in our American story." So, how does this notion relate to you? Soon, probably not as soon as you'd like, but soon, you will be members of an honored and privileged profession that will offer you tremendous opportunities for personal development and achievement, financial rewards, public recognition, and esteem. Many of you will achieve positions of great power and prestige, and some of you will become very wealthy. Each of you will have an opportunity to earn the respect and gratitude of the community in which you choose to practice your craft. Today, I want to remind you of the biblical injunction from Luke 19:26, "To whom much is given, much is required." Sadly, society is ambivalent about lawyers, and it probably is our fault. At the same time that we are elevated to positions of status and privilege, we often fail in our responsibilities as contributing citizens of our communities. We often are viewed as a greedy, uncaring group of professionals whose God is money and whose purpose in life is winning. We are seen as uncivil at best and rude at worst. We are seen as morally bankrupt and intellectually dishonest enough to argue any side of any issue depending on who will pay us the most money. We are seen as so engrossed in bottom-line results that we care little about social conditions and needy people. Some would argue that this is a false image and point to many fine examples to counter the charges. There is merit to this argument, but myth often becomes reality, and the perceptions of reality is difficult to change. I believe that it is important for each of us to personally take steps to counter these false perceptions. I would suggest that the image of the profession will change only when each of us becomes more actively involved in our community as a citizen of that community and not just as a lawyer. Each of us lives in a community with real needs. Our residents, young and old, our governments, our houses of worship, our community organizations all need help in a variety of ways, some legal, others not. As example, a public school could use tutors or mentors or chaperone for a class trip or coaches for an after-school sports team. And kids can use positive role models. A community health clinic has AIDS patients, or senior center has elderly residents who need assistance in getting Social Security benefits. An indigent tenant may need someone to represent him or her to get housing code violations corrected in a rented apartment. Perhaps the local government could use volunteer attorneys to assist them in drafting model legislation to reform procurement laws or in representing abused and neglected children. A rape crisis center may need lawyers to advise victims of abuse on how to prosecute their claims. Some local artists may need help obtaining copyrights for their work. An illegal immigrant may need assistance in prosecuting an asylum claim. The list of pressing needs in our communities across America and throughout this great state is endless. As citizens of our community, we have opportunities to offer our help. As lawyers, we have an obligation to offer our expertise. Some like to claim that they can meet their community obligations through monetary contributions to nonprofit organizations, religious institutions, and similar groups. I reject that claim, even as I urge you to provide generous financial support to such causes. I firmly believe there is significantly greater value to the personal commitment that comes in sharing your time and expertise. And I know there are, without a doubt, greater personal rewards to the individual who rolls up their sleeves, gets their hands dirty, and gives of his or her time. In sum, what America needs today is not simply more skilled and gifted lawyers, but more lawyers who will commit to making our society a better place for all of us. Experience tells me that there is not much difference or distance between many of us sitting here today and those most in need in our communities. I grew up financially poor, but rich in the values that require contributions from every citizen to his or her community. Experience also tells me that government alone cannot solve this nation's problems. If we are not willing to contribute, why should anyone else? If not us, then who? So, where does that leave me? I suggest that each of you think about the view if when you get to my age from the rear view mirror and you reflect on your professional career, I ask you to think about how you would like to be remembered. Do you want to be remembered for the illegal immigrant that you saved from certain execution if he had been deported to his native country? Or the $100 million verdict you won for some multinational corporation? Would you rather be remembered for saving an 85-year-old widow from eviction and homelessness, or for having closed a $500 million bond issue with various swaps and derivatives or other bells and whistles? Do you want to be remembered for getting a dying cancer patient basic Social Security benefits, or for having won 50 murder convictions in which the death penalty was imposed? Let me give you another view. Perhaps it might be useful to visualize the reflection in the rear view mirror this way. At the funeral of the mother of one of my dearest friends, who was one of my roommates here at Syracuse, the rabbi spoke of her mother's life in artistic terms that reminded me of my mother, who was an artist in her spare time. In his remarks, he described life as a canvas on which a self-portrait is painted. In the beginning, he said, we cannot know how large that canvas will be or what it will look like at the end of our time on this earth. It is up to each of us, he said, to determine what our portrait will look like on that canvas and how we will be remembered. As I think about what would be the most appealing canvas to me, I envision one that is dynamic yet subtle. It would have bold colors that speak and reach out to me from across the room, that attract me and invite me to explore the canvas further. It has subtle shapes and soft edges that emerge as I look closer and that suggest complexity and challenge my curiosity. I think about soft colors that soothe and comfort me. I think about stark shapes and bright lines that remind me of ethical standards and moral choices we must confront. There is a splatter of bleak colors because all of us must experience disappointments and losses. The canvas is vivid and lively, representing the vibrance of life and the richness of humanity. It has texture and contrast to reflect life's diversity. The canvas has small voids that allow me to imagine what might work in that space and offer an opportunity to complete the painting. The painting probably has a simple frame representing modest beginnings and never-ending humility. So today I ask you, as you reflect on your life's canvas, try to envision how it might look today, and more importantly, think about how you would like it to look when 35 or 40 years from now, you step away from this noble profession. Right now, that canvas has much room for definition. And it is up to each of you to determine the dimensions, the palette, the content, the reworks, the textures, the borders by which your lives will be reflected in and measured by the canvas that you will create. Whether you would rather reflect on the specific achievements during your career or the painted canvas you leave behind, let that memory be one of engaged citizenship and substantial contributions to those among us who are less fortunate than we are. Thank you.
Please raise your hand if you have questions, and we'll bring a microphone to you. It's your hand that I'm asking you to raise if you have questions. Comments are welcome as well. I have a question.
Oh, sure. Was counting somebody would.
You said there were, in your memory, no courses on transactional law when you were in law school. What would such a course look like? And how would you encourage students to, if they're interested in transactional law, what experiences specifically should they seek in law school?
Well, first I will acknowledge that today there are a number of transactional courses in a number of law schools. And there actually may be even a couple of law schools that offer courses in public finance, which is quite unusual. But one of the things about transactions, I mean, I should perhaps step back. So much of the way we have learned law is using the litigation model. And we look at that through various documents, complaints and answers and that sort of thing. On the transactional side, you also have documents that form the basis of those agreements. And I think, from my perspective, transactional work is better learned not through the litigation model, but by looking at how documents are structured and what the basic components of documents are and what they mean and how a document is drafted if you want to secure a financial obligation, and what steps you might need to take to perfect a lien, and what steps you might need to take to secure title to property. So it seems to me that it's a course that looks at various kinds of things that you can finance, how you can secure those repayment obligations with respect to the projects that are financed, what the implications are when you don't quite get it right. If you don't perfect a lien, for instance, and somebody comes in ahead of you. So it's understanding often things like real estate. It's often understanding basic property law. It's basically understanding loan agreements. It's understanding notes or other kinds of debt instruments. So it would have a number of things. You've asked me a question that I haven't thought about before, but...
Are there other questions?
There's one over here. Sure. Oh, well, great. Got two questions.
I just had a question about how you felt law schools or academic institutions in general could help foster more civic engagement beyond things like just having a pro bono requirement, things of that nature. If there's any type of way to encourage those value sets within the students.
Well, I hope most law schools today are encouraging students to look beyond the classroom to ways to be engaged in their communities. And I suspect that it won't happen through some kind of formal process, but rather you will be encouraged by faculty members or administration people or the dean or something to go out and get engaged. But I would think you may want to look more to the community where you're going to be, and you can start with your local bar, which is, or other legal organizations, which often are behind these pro bono activities to get engaged. Now, this is early in your career, I understand that, but I don't think it's too early to start thinking about the kinds of things that might interest you. One thing I didn't mention, and I think it might be important to note here, that I've been a volunteer for a very long time, and I have found a nice, interesting side benefit to being a volunteer is that I've often gotten business as a result of that volunteer work. And so you might want to think about it in that context as well. There's one over here.
Kind of going on that idea of fostering good citizenship, I wonder if you think law schools should be taking more of an opportunity. It seems to me that the idea of becoming a citizenship is taught very young, or becoming a good citizen is taught very young. Do you think law students or law schools should be reaching out more to, say, elementary education? And my second question is just, what advice would you give to people who really want to do a lot of pro bono work and a lot of work that doesn't pay a lot, but are a little worried about the massive debt?
Yeah, I understand. That's a real issue. To your first point, I think it's not, it would probably be good for there to be more communication at an earlier age for people about the obligations of citizenship, and whether the law school per se is the most ideal vehicle for that. I think that's speculation, but it certainly wouldn't hurt. And many law schools, for instance, do programs. They do street law programs in high schools and things like that, which is a vehicle through which some of this notion of citizenship can be explained. Your second question was your desire to do pro bono work and that it doesn't pay very much. Well, pro bono by definition is, quote, free service, but I understand that there are many, I understand we all need to be able to make a living. Currently today, there are probably not enough organizations for all the folks who think they want to do pro bono work. And so it might make sense, and it might make sense to see if there is a legal practice which is, quote, not objectionable to you, and that you can marry that with doing pro bono things on the side through various organizations that you're engaged with, whether it's something at your church or something at a community center or something at a school. Those are less formal programs, but I think there are points of engagement there that I think are often overlooked. And that's why I would say that you can do these individual things and not do something that's sort of an organized organizational thing, say joining a environmental justice program that is explicitly for that purpose. There may be some environmental programs that you can volunteer to assist with without being directly engaged in a formal structure.
We have time for a final question.
Oh, there's one back there.
I've got a question back there. I think that might come.
Can you stand up?
Oh, I think that was just a scratch.
Oh.
So maybe we should take that as our cue to thank our speakers for
Thank you.